The howling winds of the blizzard rattled the stagecoach windows as Gabriella Zimmerman clutched her worn leather-bound journal to her chest, watching with growing desperation as the driver and her supposed husband to be engaged in a heated argument outside. It was 1875, and she was thousands of miles from her home in Boston, in a desolate stretch of West Texas that looked nothing like the promising frontier paradise described in Henry Collier's letters. Snow swirled violently across the barren landscape as Gabriella pressed her face against the frosted glass, straining to hear their conversation over the wind. The stagecoach driver gestured wildly toward the darkening horizon, while Henry, a man who looked 20 years older than the photograph he'd sent, shook his head adamantly. "I won't take her," Henry shouted, his voice barely audible through the storm. "She's nothing like what was promised. Too skinny to work a farm, too educated to know her place. Send her back." Gabriella's heart plummeted. After 3 weeks of grueling travel, after selling nearly everything she owned to pay for passage, after leaving behind everything familiar, her supposed fiancé was rejecting her sight unseen. The driver climbed back into his seat, his expression grim as he opened the small window to the passenger compartment. "Miss, there's been a complication. Mr. Collier says the arrangement is off." The driver's voice was apologetic but firm. "We need to continue to Presidio before this storm strands us, but he won't take you in." "What am I supposed to do?" Gabriella asked, her voice barely a whisper. "There's a way station about a quarter-mile down this trail. You can wait out the storm there, and tomorrow I'll send word to the mail order company about your situation." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry, miss. I truly am." Before Gabriella could protest, the driver had already jumped down from his perch and was hauling her trunk from the back. Henry Collier didn't even look her way as he mounted his horse and rode off into the storm without a backward glance. The driver placed her trunk on the ground beside her. "The way station is just down that trail," he pointed to a barely visible path. "Follow it straight. You can't miss it." Gabriella stood frozen, watching as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her alone in the swirling snow. Her thin coat offered little protection against the biting cold of the Texas winter. She hadn't expected snow in Texas. No one had warned her that the desert could turn so bitterly cold. Grabbing the handle of her trunk, she began to drag it toward the path, but the heavy container barely budged through the accumulating snow. With trembling hands, she opened it and retrieved only what she could carry, a small carpet bag with her most essential possessions. She abandoned the trunk reluctantly, marking its location by a twisted oak tree, and began trudging through the deepening snow toward the promised way station. 20 minutes later, Gabriella realized the terrible truth: there was no way station, or if there was, she had somehow missed the path in the blinding snow. The barren landscape stretched in every direction, punctuated only by scrubby mesquite and the occasional boulder. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night approached, and her fingers had lost feeling despite her woolen gloves. Tears froze on her cheeks as she stumbled forward, no longer sure of her direction. The howling wind seemed to mock her naivety, her foolish dreams of a new life in the West. What had possessed her to trust a stranger's letters, to believe that a man she had never met would provide her the home and family she so desperately wanted? As darkness enveloped the landscape, Gabriella's steps faltered. The cold had seeped into her bones, and exhaustion weighed her limbs like lead. She stumbled against a rock outcropping that provided minimal shelter from the wind and sank to her knees. Her eyelids felt heavy, and a dangerous warmth began to spread through her body despite the cold. "Just a short rest," she whispered to herself, knowing somewhere in the recesses of her mind that falling asleep in a blizzard meant certain death. Yet she couldn't summon the strength to move. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness. A hallucination, she thought, brought on by the cold and her desperation. But the sound grew louder, more insistent. Forcing her eyes open, Gabriella saw a dark shape approaching through the curtain of snow, a horse and rider. "Hello," she called, her voice weak against the howling wind. "Please help me." The horse slowed, and the rider dismounted with fluid grace. He approached cautiously, as if unsure what he'd found. "Madam, what in God's name are you doing out here?" The voice was deep, concerned, and unmistakably real. Gabriella tried to stand but found her limbs uncooperative. The man knelt beside her, and she caught a glimpse of intense blue eyes beneath the brim of a snow-dusted Stetson. "I was abandoned," she managed, her teeth chattering violently. "The stage coach left me." Strong arms enveloped her, lifting her from the snow. "You're half frozen," he said, his voice tight with urgency. He carried her to his horse and somehow managed to mount while holding her securely against his chest. "You're coming home with me. Hold on tight, madam. My ranch is just a few miles from here." Gabriella wanted to ask his name, to thank him, but the warmth of his body against hers and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them lulled her into a state between consciousness and dreams. She leaned against the stranger's solid chest, too exhausted and cold to worry about propriety. "Stay awake," he commanded, his breath warm against her ear. "Talk to me. What's your name?" "Gabriella," she mumbled. "Gabriella Zimmerman. Miss Zimmerman, I'm Ethan Thornton. You need to stay awake until we get you warmed up. Tell me what brought you out here in this storm." Through chattering teeth, Gabriella recounted her story, how she had corresponded with Henry Collier for 6 months, how he had sent for her with promises of marriage and a good life on his Texas ranch, and how he had rejected her without so much as a proper introduction. Ethan's arms tightened around her as she spoke. "Collier," he muttered, the name sounding like a curse on his lips. "I know the man. He's done this before, brings women out here and abandons them if they don't meet his impossible standards. The last one made it to town and took the next stage back east. I have nowhere to go back to," Gabriella admitted, the reality of her situation sinking in deeper than the cold. "I sold everything to come here." "We'll figure something out," Ethan said, his voice softening. "For now, let's get you warm." Through the veil of snow, Gabriella could make out the lights of a substantial homestead. As they drew closer, she saw a large ranch house with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn, and several outbuildings, all clearly built by someone who intended to stay and prosper. Ethan guided his horse to the front porch and dismounted, then gently lifted Gabriella down. He carried her inside without hesitation, calling out as he entered, "Mrs. Flores, I need help." An older Mexican woman hurried from what appeared to be the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight of Gabriella. "Dios mío, what happened?" found her half frozen by Rattlesnake Ridge. "Collier's work left another bride to die in the storm." Ethan's voice was tight with controlled anger as he placed Gabriella in a chair near the blazing fireplace. "That devil," Mrs. Flores muttered, already removing Gabriella's wet coat and gloves. "Miss, can you feel your fingers and toes?" Gabriella nodded weakly. "They hurt terribly." "That's good, means no frostbite yet. Senor Ethan, bring hot water and blankets. I'll make tea with whiskey." Ethan disappeared and returned moments later with an armful of thick woolen blankets. Mrs. Flores worked efficiently, removing Gabriella's damp outer garments and wrapping her in the warm blankets while maintaining as much of her modesty as possible. "Drink this," she instructed, pressing a steaming mug into Gabriella's trembling hands. "Slowly now. It will warm you from the inside." The tea was strong and heavily laced with whiskey. Under normal circumstances, Gabriella would never have touched spirits, but she sipped obediently, grateful for the spreading warmth in her belly. Ethan stood nearby, his tall frame tense as he watched her. Now that she could see him clearly, Gabriella realized he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with weather-tanned skin and those striking blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His dark hair was damp from the snow, and he had removed his coat to reveal broad shoulders beneath a simple cotton shirt. "Thank you," Gabriella said, finding her voice stronger after the warm tea. "You saved my life, Mr. Thornton." "Ethan, please," he replied, his expression softening slightly, "and any decent human would have done the same." "Not Henry Collier," she said quietly, a muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw. "Collier isn't decent. He's had 3 mail-order brides before you. None stayed more than a day." "Mrs. Flores clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "He is a cruel man who wants a servant, not a wife." "What will you do now, Miss Zimmerman?" Ethan asked, leaning against the stone mantel of the fireplace. Gabriella stared into her mug, the reality of her situation overwhelming. "I don't know. I have very little money left and, as I said, nothing to return to in Boston." "You will stay here tonight," Mrs. Flores declared, in a tone that brooked no argument. "When the storm passes, we will decide what comes next." Ethan nodded in agreement. "The guest room is always ready. Mrs. Flores lives in the small house behind the main one, but she's here from dawn till after supper." "I couldn't impose," Gabriella began. "It's not an imposition," Ethan interrupted. "It's basic human decency. You need rest and time to recover. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about the future." Mrs. Flores served a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, which Gabriella ate gratefully. By the time she finished, the warmth of the fire, food, and tea with whiskey had brought color back to her cheeks, though exhaustion weighed heavily upon her. Ethan showed her to a comfortable bedroom with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a small fire already burning in the grate. Mrs. Flores left a nightgown on the bed. "It belonged to my sister before she married and moved to Austin." He hesitated at the door. "If you need anything in the night, my room is across the hall." "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Gabriella's voice caught on the words, overwhelmed by his kindness after the cruel abandonment she had experienced. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Get some rest, Gabriella. You're safe here." After he closed the door, Gabriella changed into the borrowed nightgown, marveling at the unexpected turn her journey had taken. As she slipped between the cool sheets, listening to the storm raging outside, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude for her rescue and asked for guidance on what the coming days might bring. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle. Gabriella awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. Her muscles ached from her ordeal, but the desperate cold that had nearly claimed her life was gone. She dressed in her own clothes, which Mrs. Flores had evidently cleaned and dried overnight, and ventured out of the bedroom. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon led her to the kitchen, where she found Ethan seated at a large wooden table, reading a newspaper while Mrs. Flores worked at the stove. "Good morning," Gabriella said, suddenly self-conscious. Ethan looked up, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Zimmerman, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you, and please call me Gabriella." Mrs. Flores turned from the stove with a warm smile. Sit, you need a good breakfast. Men from the ranch will try to reach your trunk today if you can tell them where you left it." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to trouble anyone." "No trouble," Ethan interrupted, folding his newspaper. My men need to check the cattle after the storm anyway. They'll pass right by where you were stranded. Over breakfast, Ethan explained that his ranch, the Double T, was one of the largest in the area, with over 5,000 acres and several hundred head of cattle. He had inherited it from his father 6 years earlier and expanded it considerably. "Do you run it alone?" Gabriella asked, curious about the absence of a Mrs. Thornton. "I have 8 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them. And Mrs. Flores here has been keeping the house since my mother passed 10 years ago." "I am sorry about your mother," Gabriella said softly. Ethan nodded his acknowledgement. "And you mentioned you have nothing to return to in Boston." Gabriella set down her coffee cup, choosing her words carefully. "My parents died in a fire 2 years ago. I worked as a teacher afterward, but the school closed due to lack of funding. I answered Mr. Collier's advertisement because—" She hesitated. "Well, because I wanted a family of my own and opportunities for unmarried women are limited." "You're educated then?" Ethan asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Yes, I attended the Boston Female Seminary. I taught grammar and literature." Mrs. Flores made a sound of approval. "Education is valuable anywhere, even in Texas." A comfortable silence fell as they finished breakfast. Afterward, Ethan excused himself to tend to ranch business, leaving Gabriella with Mrs. Flores, who welcomed her help with household tasks. As they worked side by side washing dishes, the older woman told Gabriella more about Ethan. "He is a good man, works hard, treats his men fairly, helps neighbors when they need it. But he keeps to himself too much since his father died. Running this ranch alone has made him, how do you say it, solitary." "He seems kind," Gabriella observed. Mrs. Flores gave her a knowing look. "Kind, yes. And handsome too, no. Many local girls have tried to catch his eye, but he shows no interest." Gabriella felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't suggesting, of course not," Mrs. Flores replied with a smile that suggested she thought otherwise. "Now, let's see about mending that tear in your coat." The day passed quietly as Gabriella helped with household chores, grateful to be useful. In the afternoon, 2 ranch hands returned with her trunk, which they placed in her room with respectful nods before retreating. At dinner that evening, Ethan seemed more relaxed. He spoke of his plans for the ranch, his voice animated as he described the new breeding stock he had acquired. Gabriella found herself captivated, not just by his words but by the passion behind them. This was a man who loved his land and his work. When the meal was finished, Mrs. Flores departed for her own cottage, leaving Ethan and Gabriella alone. They moved to the sitting room where Ethan built up the fire against the evening chill. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat opposite her. "Presidio could use a teacher. The town has grown enough that there are at least 15 children of school age, but no one qualified to teach them." Gabriella straightened, hope kindling inside her. "Do you think they would hire me? I'm on good terms with the town council. I could speak to them on your behalf." He hesitated. "Until then, you're welcome to stay here. The guest room is yours for as long as you need it." "That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly. You can work for your keep if that makes you more comfortable. Mrs. Flores could use help with the household, and I've seen how capable you are." He met her gaze directly. "I'm not offering charity, Gabriella. I'm offering a fair arrangement until you find your footing." Gabriella studied him, looking for any sign of ulterior motives, but found only sincerity. "Thank you, I accept, on the condition that I truly earn my place here." Ethan nodded, a rare smile transforming his serious face. "Good. We'll ride into Presidio tomorrow to speak with the council if you're feeling up to it." The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Gabriella dressed in her best navy blue traveling suit, hoping to make a good impression on the town council. When she emerged from her room, Ethan was waiting, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark waistcoat, his usual work clothes replaced by more formal attire. "You look very nice," he said, then immediately looked as if he regretted the comment. "Thank you," Gabriella replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "So do you." The ride to Presidio took just over an hour. Gabriella rode side saddle on a gentle mare Ethan had saddled for her, grateful for the riding lessons her father had insisted upon years ago. As they crested a hill, the town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with a church steeple rising above the rest. "It's not much compared to Boston," Ethan said, watching her reaction, "but it's growing. There's talk of the railroad coming through in a few years." "It looks perfectly charming," Gabriella assured him. Their arrival in town drew curious glances. Ethan was clearly well known, as people called greetings to him as they passed. He led Gabriella to a two-story building marked Town Hall and tied their horses at the hitching post outside. "Mayor Dawson should be here," he explained, helping her down from her horse. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Gabriella felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. Inside, they found Mayor Dawson, a portly man with impressive whiskers, in conversation with two other gentlemen. All three looked up as Ethan and Gabriella entered. "Thornton, good to see you," the mayor boomed, extending his hand. "What brings you to town today?" Ethan introduced Gabriella and explained her situation, leaving out the humiliating details of Henry Collier's rejection and her qualifications as a teacher. The mayor and councilmen exchanged interested looks. "Well now, Miss Zimmerman, this is providential timing," Mayor Dawson said, stroking his whiskers thoughtfully. "We just approved funds for a school teacher 2 weeks ago. Posted advertisements back east, but haven't had any replies yet." One of the other men, who introduced himself as Dr. Wallace, nodded enthusiastically. "My own children are running wild for lack of proper schooling. When could you start?" Gabriella felt almost dizzy with relief. "Immediately, if you'd like. I would need to know what supplies are available, what curriculum you prefer. We leave all that to your expertise," the mayor interrupted. "The schoolhouse needs some work. It's been used for storage these past few years, but we can have it ready within a week." After discussing salary and living arrangements, the town would provide a small house behind the schoolhouse once it was properly cleaned and furnished. Gabriella found herself officially employed as Presidio's schoolteacher. "They seem pleased," Ethan observed as they left the town hall. "The salary's not much, but in a place like Presidio, it will be enough to live on." "It's more than I could have hoped for," Gabriella admitted. "Though I confess I'm nervous about living alone. In Boston, I always had neighbors close by." "The schoolhouse is on the edge of town, but not isolated," Ethan assured her. "And I'll make sure you have what you need to be comfortable." They spent the rest of the day in town, with Ethan introducing Gabriella to various residents. By the time they headed back to the ranch, she had met the general store owner, the doctor's wife, the blacksmith, and numerous mothers eager to enroll their children in school. "Everyone seems so welcoming," Gabriella remarked as they rode home, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. "Folks around here understand the value of community," Ethan replied. "They take care of their own." "But I'm not one of their own. I'm a stranger." Ethan glanced at her, his expression serious. "You won't be for long. People here judge you by your actions, not where you come from." Over the next week, Gabriella settled into a routine at the Double T Ranch. During the days, she helped Mrs. Flores with household tasks and spent time preparing lessons for her future students. In the evenings, she often sat with Ethan in the study, where they talked about books, life in Boston compared to Texas, and his experiences growing up on the frontier. She learned that he had fought briefly in the Civil War as a very young man, returning home when his father fell ill. He spoke of his sister Abigail with evident affection, and of his hopes to expand his cattle operation further north. Gabriella found herself drawn to his quiet strength and integrity. Unlike the polished society men she had known in Boston, Ethan was straightforward, without pretense or affectation. When he gave his word, she knew instinctively that he would keep it. For his part, Ethan seemed to enjoy her company, lingering over after dinner conversations and finding reasons to include her in his daily routine. He began taking her on rides around the property, proudly showing her the improvements he had made and the natural beauty of the land. During one such ride, they stopped at a high point overlooking a valley where a stream meandered through cottonwood trees, their leaves just beginning to unfurl in the early spring warmth. "This is my favorite spot on the entire ranch," Ethan confessed, dismounting and helping Gabriella down from her horse. "I come here to think when decisions need making." "It's beautiful," Gabriella agreed, taking in the panoramic view. "So peaceful." They stood in companionable silence for a long moment before Ethan spoke again. "The schoolhouse is ready. Mayor Dawson sent word yesterday. They're expecting you to start next Monday." Gabriella turned to him, surprised by the mix of emotions his words provoked: excitement at beginning her new position, but also a strange reluctance to leave the double tea and the man beside her. "That's wonderful news," she said, trying to sound more enthusiastic than she felt. Ethan's expression was unreadable as he gazed out over the valley. "You'll be missed at the ranch. Mrs. Flores has grown fond of you, and I of her, of this place." Gabriella hesitated, then added softly, "Of you." Ethan looked at her then, his blue eyes intense. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, but he merely nodded and said, "We should head back. Storm clouds are gathering to the west." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. They had just unsaddled the horses when the first heavy drops began to fall. They ran for the house, laughing as they reached the porch just as the sky opened in a torrential downpour. Ethan held the door for her, and as Gabriella passed him, their eyes met. Something electric passed between them, a recognition of feelings neither had acknowledged aloud. The moment was broken by Mrs. Flores calling from the kitchen that dinner was ready. Throughout the meal, Gabriella was acutely aware of Ethan's presence across the table, of the way his hands moved as he spoke, of the rare smile that transformed his serious face. Later that evening, after Mrs. Flores had gone home and the house was quiet except for the steady drumming of rain on the roof, Gabriella found Ethan in the study, staring into the fire with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "May I join you?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Of course." Gabriella took the chair opposite his, gathering her courage. "Ethan, I wanted to thank you properly for everything you've done for me. You saved my life that night in the storm, but more than that, you've given me a chance at a new beginning." "You don't owe me thanks," he said, setting his glass aside. "Anyone would have helped you. No, not anyone, and not the way you have." She met his gaze steadily. "I know I'll be moving to town soon, but I hope, that is, I would like it if we could still see each other occasionally." Ethan leaned forward, his expression suddenly intense. "Gabriella, there's something I need to tell you about Henry Collier." Confused by this unexpected turn in the conversation, she nodded for him to continue. "After I found you that night, I sent one of my men to look into Collier's situation. He's been arrested for fraud. Apparently, He's been charging multiple women to come west as his bride, then rejecting them and keeping their money. You're not the first, but you may be the last. He's likely facing prison time. Gabriella absorbed this information with mixed emotions, vindication that Henry's cruelty hadn't gone unpunished, but also a renewed sense of how close she had come to disaster. "I see," she said finally. "I suppose I should be grateful in a way. If he had accepted me, I would have been married to such a man." "That's what I've been thinking," Ethan admitted, his voice low. "That night finding you in the snow, I was furious at Collier, but now I almost want to thank him." "Thank him?" Gabriella echoed, confused. Ethan stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. "Because if he hadn't abandoned you, I would never have found you. And these past 2 weeks, Gabriella, I've never met anyone like you." Her heart racing, Gabriella struggled to find words. "Ethan, I know it's too soon," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "You've barely had time to settle here, and I'm not asking for promises. But before you moved to town, I wanted you to know that my interest in helping you wasn't entirely selfless. I've grown to care for you more than I should admit." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Gabriella looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face, a face that had become dear to her in such a short time. "I've grown to care for you too," she whispered. "More than I expected possible." Ethan's expression softened, and he raised one hand to gently cup her cheek. "May I call on you then? Properly once you're settled in town?" Gabriella nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. Ethan rose and pulled her to her feet, still holding her hands. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to release her. "It's getting late." "Yes," Gabriella agreed, equally reluctant to end the moment. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss that was both chaste and charged with unspoken promise. "Good night, Gabriella," he murmured. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her heart fuller than it had been in years. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a perfect day for Gabriella to begin her new position as Presidio's schoolteacher. Ethan insisted on driving her into town himself, loading her trunk and 2 crates of books onto the wagon. The small house behind the schoolhouse was simple but clean, with a front room, bedroom, and kitchen. The town women had worked together to make it welcoming, with fresh curtains at the windows and a vase of early wildflowers on the table. Mayor Dawson's wife, a cheerful woman with iron-gray hair, met them at the house to show Gabriella around. "We've stocked the pantry with essentials," she explained. "And there's a list of children expected tomorrow morning, 15 in all, ranging from 6 to 14 years old." Ethan helped bring in Gabriella's belongings, setting up her trunk at the foot of the bed and arranging her books on the shelves in the front room. When everything was in place, Mrs. Dawson tactfully excused herself, leaving Ethan and Gabriella alone. "It's cozy," Ethan said, looking around the small house. "But it seems very quiet after the ranch." "I'm sure I'll adjust," Gabriella replied, though she already missed the comforting sounds of the double T, the distant lowing of cattle, the ranch hands calling to each other, "Mrs. Flores singing softly in Spanish as she worked. "I'll be in town on Thursday for the cattle auction," Ethan said. "May I call on you then? Perhaps take you to dinner at the hotel?" Gabriella smiled, pleased by his eagerness to see her again. "I would like that very much." Their parting was brief, but charged with emotion. As Ethan drove away, Gabriella stood in the doorway of her new home, watching until the wagon disappeared around a bend in the road. Then she turned to the task of preparing for her first day of teaching, pushing aside the strange emptiness she felt at Ethan's absence. The next morning, Gabriella stood nervously at the schoolhouse door as children began to arrive, some accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher. By 8 o'clock, all 15 students were seated at the desks, watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to trepidation. "Good morning," she began, her teaching experience helping to steady her nerves. "I am Miss Zimmerman, and I'm honored to be your teacher. We have much to learn together, but first, I'd like to learn about you." The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing classroom procedures. By afternoon, Gabriella had a clearer picture of her students' abilities and needs. Some could barely read, while others showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics or literature. The remainder of the week followed a similar pattern as Gabriella adjusted to her new role, and the children grew accustomed to her teaching style. She was strict but fair, demanding their best efforts while acknowledging their individual strengths and weaknesses. By Friday, even the most reluctant students were participating enthusiastically in lessons. Thursday evening's dinner with Ethan was a bright spot in an already satisfying week. He arrived at her door precisely at 6, dressed in his best clothes, his hair still damp from a recent washing. They walked together to the Presidio hotel, where he had reserved a table by the window. Over a simple but well-prepared meal of roast chicken and vegetables, Ethan asked detailed questions about her students and teaching methods, genuinely interested in her work. In turn, Gabriella inquired about the cattle auction and his plans for the ranch. "I've purchased 50 acres adjoining my north pasture," he told her, his expression animated. "The land has a year-round spring that will be invaluable during dry seasons." "You speak of the ranch with such passion," Gabriella observed. "It's clearly more than just a business to you." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The Double T is my heritage. 3 generations of Thorntons have worked that land, but it's also my future." He hesitated, then added quietly, "A future I once assumed would include a family of my own someday." The implication of his words hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, they spoke of books they had both read, of the changing seasons in Texas compared to Boston, of the town's plans for growth. As they walked back to her house after dinner, Ethan took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. It was a simple gesture, but one that felt significant, a public acknowledgement of his interest in her. At her door, he hesitated. "May I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church?" "I would like that," Gabriella replied, her heart quickening at the prospect. Ethan's goodbye was another chaste kiss, this time to her cheek, but the tenderness in his eyes spoke volumes. As she watched him walk away, Gabriella acknowledged to herself what she had been reluctant to admit: she was falling in love with Ethan Thornton. Spring blossomed across the Texas landscape, bringing wildflowers to the plains and new leaves to the cottonwoods along the creeks. Gabriella settled into her role as teacher, earning the respect of her students and their parents through her dedication and skill. Ethan called on her regularly, their courtship progressing with a deliberate pace that suited them both. They attended church together on Sundays, took picnic lunches to scenic spots around Presidio, and spent quiet evenings on her small front porch, talking until the stars emerged in the vast Texas sky. One Sunday in late April, nearly 2 months after Gabriella had begun teaching, Ethan invited her to dinner at the Double T. "Mrs. Flores misses you," he explained, "and I thought you might like to see the spring calves." Gabriella accepted eagerly, having missed the ranch more than she cared to admit. Ethan arrived in his wagon early Sunday afternoon, and they rode out to the Double T, the journey filled with comfortable conversation. Mrs. Flores greeted Gabriella with an exuberant hug. "The house has not been the same without you," she declared. "Señor, Ethan is too quiet when you are not here." Ethan's ears reddened at this observation, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he suggested they visit the new calves before dinner, offering Gabriella his arm as they walked to the nearest pasture. The spring calves frolicked in the lush grass, their mothers watching protectively nearby. Gabriella laughed in delight at their antics, and Ethan watched her, his expression softening in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "You belong here," he said suddenly, his voice low. "On the ranch. I've thought so since that first morning when I saw you helping Mrs. Flores in the kitchen." Gabriella turned to him, startled by his directness. "Ethan, I know we've only known each other a short time," he continued, taking both her hands in his, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Gabriella. I think I began falling in love with you that night I found you in the snow." The words she had longed to hear hung in the air between them. Gabriella looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission bringing a sense of rightness of coming home. Ethan's smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms. This time, his kiss found her lips gentle at first, then deepening as she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Help me build a life here on the Double T." Tears of joy blurred Gabriella's vision. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan lifted her off her feet in his exuberance, spinning her around as she laughed. Setting her down gently, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted, emptying the contents into his palm, a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, saying it should go to the woman I chose to share my life with." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Gabriella felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way the diamond caught the afternoon light. "I will treasure it always." They walked back to the house hand in hand, stopping occasionally to exchange kisses that grew increasingly less restrained. Mrs. Flores took one look at them and burst into delighted laughter, hugging them both and immediately launching into wedding plans. Over dinner, they discussed practical matters. Gabriella would need to find a replacement teacher, as she couldn't continue once they were married. Ethan suggested they wait until the school term ended in June, giving the town council time to hire someone new. "We could be married in early July," he proposed. "That would give us time to prepare properly." "July would be perfect," Gabriella agreed, her heart full to bursting with happiness. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Presidio. Most received it with genuine pleasure, though Gabriella noticed a few disappointed looks from young women who had clearly harbored hopes regarding Ethan themselves. The town council expressed regret at losing their teacher, but understood her decision and began advertising for a replacement immediately. The weeks leading up to their wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Gabriella ordered fabric for a wedding dress from the general store, and Mrs. Flores helped her sew it a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan commissioned a new suit from the tailor in El Paso, and the church was reserved for July 8th. As the school term drew to a close, Gabriella felt a twinge of sadness at leaving her students. She had grown fond of them all, from 6-year-old Tommy Wilson with his missing front teeth to 14-year-old Sarah Mitchell, whose gift for mathematics suggested she might someday attend college. On the last day of school, the children surprised her with handmade cards and small gifts, a pressed wildflower, a carefully whittled wooden pencil box, a jar of honey from the Andersons' hives. Their parents had organized a picnic on the schoolhouse grounds, during which Mayor Dawson announced that the town had hired a new teacher, a young woman from San Antonio who would arrive in time for the fall term. "We can never replace you, Miss Zimmerman," he said, raising his glass in a toast, "but we wish you every happiness in your marriage to one of Presidio's finest citizens." The wedding day dawned clear and hot, typical for July in Texas. Gabriella dressed in her new gown with the help of Mrs. Flores and Mrs. Dawson, her hands trembling slightly as they pinned fresh wildflowers in her upswept hair. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Flores declared, her eyes damp with emotion. "Like an angel." The church was filled to capacity with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area. As Gabriella walked down the aisle on Mayor Dawson's arm, he had kindly offered to give her away in the absence of her father. She saw only Ethan waiting for her at the altar, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration that made her heart swell. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain as they promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception was held in the town square, where tables had been set up beneath cotton bunting strung from tree to tree. There was music and dancing, abundant food and drink, and well wishes from everyone in attendance. Gabriella danced with her new husband, both of them too happy to notice the heat or their tired feet. As the celebration continued into the evening, Ethan leaned close to whisper, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Thornton?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Gabriella. "Yes," she replied softly. "I'm ready." They said their goodbyes amid good-natured teasing and rode to the double T in Ethan's wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands. The house was quiet and welcoming, lanterns lit in the windows to guide them home. Ethan carried her across the threshold, setting her down gently in the front hall. "Welcome home," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "for good this time." Their first night as husband and wife was a tender discovery of each other, their love deepening with each caress, each whispered endearment. Gabriella found in Ethan's arms the belonging she had sought her entire life, and he in hers the partnership he had always longed for. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Ethan traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I keep thinking about that night in the blizzard," he murmured. "How close I came to losing you before I even found you." Gabriella propped herself up on one elbow, looking into his face in the moonlight that spilled through the window. "I believe we were meant to find each other. That even if Henry Collier hadn't abandoned me that night, somehow, our paths would have crossed." "I like that thought," Ethan said, drawing her close again. "That some things are simply meant to be." The years that followed proved the truth of Gabriella's belief. Their marriage flourished like the double T itself, growing stronger and more fruitful with each passing season. Ethan's expertise with cattle and land management expanded their holdings, while Gabriella's education and practical sensibilities contributed equally to their success. Their first child, a son they named James, after Ethan's father, arrived just 10 months after their wedding. He was a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, whose curly brown hair and mischievous smile brought joy to everyone at the double T. Gabriella never returned to formal teaching, but she ensured her children received an excellent education, supplementing the town school's curriculum with additional lessons at home. She also found time to establish a small library in Presidio, donating books and organizing fundraisers to purchase more. Ethan, meanwhile, became a respected figure in the county, serving on the town council and helping to negotiate the railroad's passage through Presidio in 1882, a development that brought unprecedented prosperity to the region. They faced challenges, of course, drought years when the cattle grew thin and profits dwindled, a fire that destroyed part of the barn one summer, the difficult birth of their third child, another son named William. But they weathered each storm together, their bond only strengthening through adversity. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Gabriella with a journey back to the spot where he had found her that snowy night. The landscape looked entirely different in July sunshine, the rocky outcropping where she had huddled now surrounded by summer wildflowers. "I come here sometimes," Ethan admitted, "to remember how close I came to losing you and how grateful I am that I didn't." Gabriella leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "That night, when you lifted me onto your horse and said you're coming home, I had no idea what those words would come to mean, that you were bringing me to the home I'd been searching for my entire life." Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his as he had done the day he proposed. "I love you more now than I did then, if that's possible. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life." "And mine," Gabriella replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, the gesture as familiar and necessary as breathing. "The very best." 25 years after that fateful blizzard, the Double T Ranch was hosting a Christmas celebration unlike any before. The house had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, and now bustled with activity as children and grandchildren gathered for the holiday. James, now 24 and recently married, had taken over much of the ranch management, implementing new breeding techniques he had learned during his studies at the Agricultural College in Austin. Elizabeth, at 22, had followed in her mother's footsteps and become a teacher, though she taught music rather than general studies. William, their youngest at 19, was home from his first semester at university, full of stories about city life and new ideas. The original small house had grown to include additional bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a spacious dining room that could seat 20 comfortably. On this Christmas Eve, every chair was filled as the extended family gathered for dinner. James and his wife Sarah, Elizabeth and her fiancé Michael, William, Mrs. Flores, now well into her 70s, but still insisting on supervising the holiday cooking, and several of the longtime ranch hands who had no family of their own. After dinner, they gathered in the parlor around the piano that Ethan had purchased for Elizabeth's 16th birthday. She played carols while everyone sang, the harmonies sometimes faltering but the joy unmistakable. When the children had been tucked into bed with promises of Santa's imminent arrival, Ethan and Gabriella found themselves alone on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt against the December chill. "Remember our first Christmas?" Gabriella asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "We'd been married less than 6 months." Ethan chuckled, the sound deep and comforting. "I recall giving you a set of wooden spoons I'd carved myself and being terrified you'd be disappointed." "They were beautiful," Gabriella protested. "I still use them." "And you gave me that journal," Ethan remembered, "the one with the leather cover. I filled every page with notes about the ranch and our life together." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Despite the years that had added silver to their hair and lines around their eyes, they still found in each other the same wonder and gratitude that had marked their early days together. "I've been thinking," Ethan said eventually, "about retiring from active ranching." James is more than capable of running things now, and I find myself wanting more time to travel with you, to visit Elizabeth when she marries and moves to Austin, to see all the places we've talked about over the years." Gabriella turned to study his face, still handsome at 55, still the face she loved above all others. "Are you certain? The double T has been your life's work." "It has," he agreed, "but you have been my life's joy, and I think we've earned the right to enjoy these years together, don't you?" Tears pricked at Gabriella's eyes as she nodded. "I would love that, to see the world with you, to have you all to myself sometimes." Ethan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then it's settled. James can take over full management in the spring, and we'll plan our first adventure." "Where shall we go first? New Orleans, San Francisco, maybe even back to Boston, anywhere," Gabriella said truthfully. "As long as we're together." As they sat wrapped in the quilt, planning their future adventures, a few snowflakes began to drift from the night sky, rare in this part of Texas, but not unheard of. Gabriella extended her hand, catching a flake on her palm. "Snow," she murmured, "like the night you found me." Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting the same memory. "The night that changed everything." "The best night of my life," Gabriella said softly, "though I didn't know it then." As the snow continued to fall gently around them, Ethan and Gabriella remained on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the expanded ranch house, the sounds of their children's laughter still echoing from inside, the life they had created from that chance encounter in a blizzard. In the distance, a lone coyote called, its voice carrying across the Texas plains that had become Gabriella's home, so far from the Boston streets where she had been raised. She had found here not just a husband and a family, but a purpose and a place that truly belonged to her. "I love you, Ethan Thornton," she said, the words as true now as they had been when she first spoke them beside a pasture of spring calves 25 years earlier. "Thank you for bringing me home that night." Ethan's arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion as he replied, "And I love you, Gabriella Thornton, more with each passing day." As the snow continued to fall softly around them, they remained on the porch, two hearts that had found in each other the belonging they had both sought, a belonging that had begun on a stormy night with 7 simple words. "You're coming home with me. Hold on."